All right, welcome back to the Algorithm Pro Football Analysis. We'll be talking about Week 17 and Week 16. We went 11-5. Pretty good week. There's a couple disappointing games I thought could have gone differently, but anyhow, let's move on to Week 17. Week 17. This is where, if you look at the playoff standings, this is where things start to get difficult in the last 2 weeks. So this is where teams who have for sure spots. Uh, are going to be a lot more likely to definitely not be playing their best players. This is where I also think teams that are on that cusp are going to be really motivated to win. And so sometimes, and then what's also difficult then is if you get really poor teams like the Broncos, the Colts, the Rams, they're going to start putting in guys who are really motivated because they're playing for future contracts. So it just makes the dynamics of this types of doing predictions interesting, more difficult. With that, let's go ahead and get onto it. So for tomorrow night's game, we've got Dallas versus Tennessee. Dallas is favored by 12 points. Given the fact that I think Tennessee probably has about the worst quarterback out there right now, um, I would go for that. So the model straight up with no uh, uh, adjustment has Dallas winning by about 1.5. Um, if you look at the correlated point spread, or a little bit closer to 3 points if you look at the averages. When you look at the Bayesian analysis, which in this case here I'm more prone to do so, uh, the algorithm has been overestimating uh, Tennessee and underestimating Dallas. In which case, when you take that in consideration, it says, Dallas should win by about 11, 12 points, which is what the point spread is. Again, it's always kind of hard to tell in these situations, but I'm inclined to go with Dallas in this case. When we look at the run pass charts, some of the things that really stand out to me is when you look over at the upper right corner, that chart. Tennessee hasn't been able to really protect the quarterback. They've been having some ball control issues and just really not a whole lot of explosiveness. When you only have one weapon, that's Derrick Henry, it really makes it a lot easier on the defense to rule things out. I think that's what we're seeing. It'll be interesting to see how Dallas they can be really explosive, but they can also play down to the level of their competition, which makes 11, 12 point spread difficult to make. So, but if they come out and play, they should be able to. All right. Arizona versus Atlanta. So I think Arizona is one of those teams that's pretty much folded for the year. Atlanta, uh, excuse me. Atlanta is not exactly a good team, but I really think Arizona has just mailed it. Has mailed it in. I'm not sure that they really have a whole lot to show. The model is pretty much showing that Atlanta should win this fairly handily, and so I'm going to take Atlanta and the point. When I look at the run pass chart, uh, the big difference there is going to be in the running game, and then not to mention if you consider the fact that Kyler Murray isn't the one passing, that passing game goes down quite a bit as well. So thing when you look over at the upper right hand corner, it also shows uh, I think a bit more explosiveness if you can compare the explosiveness of Atlanta versus Arizona. I just don't think Arizona has very much there at all. Both teams have some quarterback protection problems and some turnovers, which, quite frankly, most poor teams do. So that's not a real shocker there. Again, neither one of these teams are particularly good, but I think Atlanta is right now the better of the two, regardless. And with Kyler Murray out, I think that team is folded. When we go back a bit, Chicago, neither one of these teams have a particularly good defense, but I really think that when you look at that offensive rush rank for Chicago, it's not going to be anywhere near that whatsoever. Whereas Detroit should be firing on all cylinders. And then uh, it'll be interesting to see, the sacks and such. Is it showing that Chicago, that Justin Fields does get sacked a lot. However, I don't know how much of that's because he's also trying to run. So that should be interesting to watch. But all in all, I think Chicago playing without Justin Fields, everything should just get worse. But we'll see. They do have definitely some pretty strong strong linemen up front. So, but looking at Detroit's trends and how they're moving, they've been looking pretty strong. Denver versus Kansas City. So again, this is one of those where we have a team that has clinched a conference. I believe Kansas City has clinched the AFC West, playing against a team that is horrible. And quite frankly, if you watch the last Denver game, there are a lot of fighting going on the sidelines. They just fired their coach. That is a team that is in massive disarray, which is the model has Kansas City winning by a lot anyhow. And with that team as much disarray, it's not hard to see why that is. Then when we come over here, some of the things I do find the chart sometimes interesting. You might look at it and go, oh, well, it shows, comparable run and passing. But then when you look at that upper boundary of what uh, Patrick Mahomes can do, that is where I think you should be looking more at how that performance should be. Then when you look at the overall the explosiveness of Kansas City, and then you compare that with, my goodness, like how much the Denver quarterbacks are getting sacked and turning the ball over. It's a rough game for Denver right now, which is interesting because I think they've actually got some pretty good players. They've really underperformed this year. Moving on to Miami versus New England. New England's favored by 3 points. I'm going to take Miami. Uh, the model has New England winning by about 3.5 points, about 3 points really. Uh, However, when you look at the Bayesian, it shows that the model has overpredicted both of these teams. And also, I realize that Tua Tagovailoa is not playing this week, but Teddy Bridgewater is a very good replacement in that case. So I think it should be a better game the uh, than what the point spread says. So New England, I think, is always an interesting case. People seem to go back and forth on whether or not Bill Belichick is a genius or not. That notwithstanding, I try and use the model here to take that aspect out. So, like I said, if I look at uh, uh, the score straight up, is it shows that the point spread really is it does favor New England by about 3 points, but at the same time, um, uh, 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 the model has been overestimating the the capability of both of these teams, and in this case, it says that it's more like they're even. So, in which case, I just as soon take the under. But both of these teams are playing for wild or we're playing for playoff spots, so anything can happen. It should be a good game. When I look at the run pass chart, uh, some of the things that stand out to me here are the QB sacks. Both teams are having a hard time protecting their quarterback, and the big thing that I always point out whenever I look at this chart with Miami is on such an explosive team. Anytime you've got Tyreek Hill, you should expect to see explosive scoring, explosive offense, and that's exactly what that shows. Um, so, all right, with Indianapolis versus New York. So this is one where the straight up the model says that they're about even. Um, New York is playing for a playoff spot. Indianapolis has been eliminated. Uh, Sometimes it's hard to really say what that means. When I watched Indianapolis play the other day, their defense looked strong. It didn't look like they'd given up on the season, even though they really don't have a whole lot to play for. Um, the thing that is absolutely certain is they have no deep pass whatsoever. So I do think that New York should win this game. I'm not sure they're going to win by 6. Uh, and so then when I look at um, yeah. So when I look at the Bayesian revision, it shows in either case that uh, it's a um, should be a close game. and I and New York does have an advantage, but it's not by 6 points. Then when we go look at the run pass charts, not a whole lot to see here. You can definitely see there's some potential for some high level passing on both sides. Both teams have a hard time protecting their quarterback for sure, and neither team is particularly explosive. And so, whenever I personally see a point spread of 6 points, I get real leery of a 6 point, those bigger point spreads. All right, New Orleans versus Philly. Philly, I believe, has secured their or is absolutely going to the playoff. They've absolutely secured that part. Um, and I think New Orleans is on the cusp. Or they may have just been eliminated. Uh, um, Again, sometimes it's difficult. I don't think Jalen Hurts is going to be playing. Quite frankly, why would you play him? That does make it difficult to do that. But when I look at this, they're playing in Philly, and New Orleans just isn't that good of a team, albeit in their last game, I thought that they played pretty well against the Saints. So, that can be difficult to pull that out. Uh, uh, and so let's go ahead and take a look at the run pass charts. Um, Overall, Philly is a strong team, particularly with a strong running game. I think New Orleans at best has been inconsistent. Sometimes they really come out and put some points and some yards up there, and other times they just can't seem to find it. So that makes it just difficult sometimes to predict these things when you see that wild spread. The one thing I will say is when I look at the Philly uh, um, uh, in the upper right hand corner, um, they do a reasonably good job, I think, of protecting the quarterback. Again, when you have running quarterback, sometimes you're going to tend to run into more sacks. They're trying to keep that play alive, but really good ball control. And I think that that's always a good omen. They've got quite a bit of quite a bit more explosiveness as well. And so, typically speaking, I think that I feel a lot more comfortable um, picking a team that is good fundamental football, good running game, balanced pass and rush, controls the ball, and protects the quarterback and has some explosiveness. That's what these charts show. When I look at the point spread of 3 point Tampa Bay, I have a hard time taking that when I know that they've been struggling to put up points, have been struggling to find a rhythm. They don't have a running game, and Tom Brady has not been Tom Brady this year. And when the other team can control the ball and control the tempo, it's going to lead to a closer game. I feel more comfortable taking the under, and that's what I see from a variety of the stats here. A couple things that do worry me is the sacks that Carolina's given up, but at the same time they've got some explosiveness as well. Okay, Cleveland versus Washington. Washington's favored by 2 points. I'm going to take Cleveland. Cleveland has been eliminated. Washington has not. They're on the bubble. The model showing this is fairly even, whereas the odds are giving just a slight advantage to Washington. Again, this is difficult because Cleveland's been eliminated, so you don't know if they're just going to go out and if they've given up. Uh, certainly with the way that they played against New Orleans, I'm not sure that they really went out and played quite as strong as they can. So these last two games, sometimes it's just difficult to figure that one out. So in this case here, I'm just going to go with the model and assume it's going to be somewhat close uh, and with a slight advantage to Cleveland. We go to the run pass charts. Uh, Not a whole lot stands out to me here. Washington is slightly more explosive. Cleveland has a hard time protecting the quarterback, and they've had some problems with interceptions. Not surprising given the quarterback situation. So that notwithstanding, though, Cleveland overall is a solid team, solid run game with some capability to really turn on when they pass. We'll see which team comes out. Jacksonville versus Houston. Jacksonville's favored by 4.5. The model has Jacksonville winning by a bit more than that. Although I got to give some kudos to Houston. Um, they've shown some moxie. They've shown that if you're ever going to take an under, they're not a bad team to take that under on, even though they're poor pretty much across the board. The model overall has been predicting very well Houston's performance because they're consistently bad, is really what that points out. And it's also been pretty good with Jacksonville. So with this case here, um, uh, again, anything can happen. Jacksonville's on the cusp. Houston is out. It's always hard to tell how a bad team like Houston's going to approach that. Should be could be interesting, and it could be. When we go to the run pass charts, the more consistent run pass game obviously is going to stand out. Then when you go to the upper right and you look at Houston, that potential for just being sacked, they obviously have a horrible offensive line, horrible ball control. Um, they have shown some explosiveness, about the same as what Jacksonville has, but overall, you're not going to win football games when you're giving up that many sacks and not being able to control the ball. San Francisco versus the Raiders. San Francisco is favored by 10. It's not hard to see why, considering the Raiders just announced that they will not be playing Derek Carr for the last 2 games. Not surprising. He stunk the last 2 games. He stunk, I think, most of the season, to tell you the truth. San Francisco has been rolling, particularly since they've got Christian McCaffrey. Again, you might go back and say, yeah, but that's such a high point spread. It is, and I agree. But at the same time, I think the Raiders have just thoroughly given up on themselves. It can be hard to tell what's going to happen when you have a new quarterback. I think it's Jared Steedham who's getting the shot. But at the same time, they're a poor team. Say to take one or the other. Realistically speaking, if that point spread were very much higher, that would probably take the under. Because in that case here, but this case here, I'm just really picking who I think is going to win. And in this case here, I'm just going to go ahead and use the model's slight advantage for the Jets. Green Bay versus Minnesota. Green Bay is favored by 3.5 points. Green Bay's won their last 3 games. Of their last 3 wins, I really only think the one against Miami was any good. And whereas wins against Chicago and the Rams just I don't think were particularly impressive. With that, Green Bay is playing to get in the playoffs. Minnesota secured their spot. The model says Green Bay should win, but it says it's close. Says it's very close. What I'd also look at then is the model has very dramatically underrepresented Minnesota, and whereas the model has been very accurate with Green Bay. So typically speaking, when I look at that, is I would interpret that to mean that I should probably expect Green Bay to score right around 24, 25 points. But I would think that Minnesota is probably going to be higher than what is predicted, given what typically what the past model has predicted. And so that's where when I look at the Bayesian, is it says Minnesota has a correlated point spread of 10 point. I'm not sure that that's exactly what that means, but this is where I'm willing to take. When I look at the run pass charts, again, Minnesota is a really good team. They can certainly be inconsistent. Green Bay has been improving all year long. And I would say Aaron Rodgers, as usual, is good at not getting sacked a whole lot. He's thrown a lot more interceptions than he normally does, as we can see there. Minnesota definitely has some problems protecting the quarterback, and they have a turnover problem with Kirk Cousins. Throws a lot of interceptions. That's going to be a problem. So it should be a close game. Both teams have something to be playing for. Green Bay more than Minnesota, but it is a conference rivalry, so it should be fun to watch. Chargers versus Rams. Chargers are favored by 6.5 points. Again, the one thing I'll say here is the Chargers should be better than what they are. I don't know why they. I mean, I quite well. It shows that they've got what like 5 or 6 losses. I think that they should be better than that. They seem to struggle an awful lot, is really what it looks like to me. The Rams are miserable. The Rams 51-14 win over the Broncos tells me that they can beat a mid-level high school team. Not a lot to say there with that, but what I would say is 6.5 point spread. They're playing. They're both playing at home. I think there's some pride on the line here. Um, and the model has underpredicted both of these teams. So when I look at the Bayesian, it says, it should be closer. The Chargers really have not been blowing teams out this year. And the Rams have, pretty consistently been scoring right around 16 to 18 points. So that 6.5 point spread gets hard. But again, if you look at the scoring model then for the Chargers, is it shows that they do have the potential to light up that score. But whether it shows up or not is always entertaining to watch. And so again, when we go to the run pass charts, the Rams can't protect their quarterback at all. Baker Mayfield seems to be eluding some of that pressure a bit better, but he's only played 2 games, so I wouldn't read too much into that. Whereas the Chargers, Justin Herbert, that dude could just flat out pass. But both teams are having a hard time protecting their quarterback. Both teams are throwing interceptions. And neither team, the Rams have absolutely no explosiveness, and the Chargers just don't have as much explosiveness as one would have thought. So, like I said, so when it's a 2 point spread, sometimes that's where you just look at it and say, well, who do you think is going to win? And the numbers are suggesting that Baltimore should win that. Okay, I think this will be the game of the week here coming up. Buffalo versus Cincinnati. Buffalo's favored by 1 point. I'm going to take Buffalo. The model has Buffalo winning very, very close game, somewhere between 2 to 4 points, depending on what type of. If you're looking at the averages, it should be 21 to 24 or 24-21 Buffalo. Um, when we go to the run pass, I think this is where it starts to get interesting. But we know both teams can pass. Buffalo's got a stronger run game. One thing I will say though is uh, it just amazes me how Josh Allen seems to throw interceptions at the wrong time. When you look at the total number of interceptions, both of those guys, they're going to be slinging it. They're both going to be throwing some interceptions. Cincinnati is showing their explosiveness, but right on par there is Buffalo with that. So a slight advantage, I think, to Buffalo in this case. But I think this will be the absolute game to watch of the week. All right. Well, that is the end of this week. Wish everyone good luck, and we'll follow up again next week.